I wrote this piece of music that felt really emotional to me, and I shared it with Kris, and he listened. And he was like, "Yeah, this isn't it. This is not right."
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Coley. Welcome to Scene on the Screen, brought to you by Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes, where we talk movies with some of the people behind the scenes at NBC Universal. When entertainment works best, sometimes it opens a window into a world we've never imagined. Other times, it shows us a mirror image of our lives with a heightened sense of home. Today, we're going to dig into the question, what have you seen on the screen that has done that? I'm here today with Academy Award-winning and Emmy and Grammy-nominated composer Kris Bowers for a special live edition of the Scene on the Screen podcast, filmed live at SCAD Film Festival in Savannah, Georgia.
Thank you.
Kris, thank you so much for being here. My favorite question, it's how I start every single podcast episode. Please tell everyone who you are, what you do, and how you work with the folks at NBC Universal.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Good to see you. My name is Kris Bowers, and I'm a pianist, composer, filmmaker, and I started working on The Wild Robot because of Mike Knobloch and Natalie Hayden at Universal. And they reached out to me because they had spoken to Chris Sanders about the possibility of me scoring the film. And so they sent me the book the weekend before I had the meeting, and I went in for the meeting and was itching to be a part of it.
Yeah. The Wild Robot is an incredible book series by Peter Brown, and it's directed by Chris, and the reception to it has been kind of astounding. Yeah. I'm curious for you, though, before we get to moments like Wild Robot or some of the other things you've worked on, like, I don't know, Bridgerton and the Best Picture winning Green Book. I mean, you've done so much in your short career, but how did you start from a passionate musician and then eventually grow into what you became working in film composition?
Yeah, so my parents decided before I was born they wanted me to play piano. And they're not musicians, they're just very strange people. And so when I was 4, they put me in piano lessons, and they were the kind of parents that were very eager to have me practice. Like my dad sat behind me every day while I practiced from the time I was 4 until we fought about it when I was 15. And it was really around 8 or 9 that I started to feel slightly less interested or more interested in playing outside or drawing and things like that, that my parents decided to put me in jazz lessons at the same time as classical lessons. And it was the jazz lessons that unlocked a different side of me. I think that it was the fact that musically I felt connected to that music a little bit more, but also improvisation was a big thing for me, where I realized like, I have a core memory being around maybe 10, 11 and being very angry with my parents and not being able to tell them that, and deciding that I'm going to play piano and improvise from this angry headspace. And then 30 minutes later, I wasn't that angry anymore. Wow. And so it was really that time period, like in middle school, where I started to rely on the piano to process emotions, to express these emotions like anger or sadness or anything else that I didn't feel like I had a place to express them verbally. And that's really where I wanted to continue to do it myself without having been told to do it. And around that same time, we used to watch movies all the time. Like my dad was a writer for film and TV, and so we'd go to a movie as soon as it came out. And I remember being able to listen to the score for a movie like Jurassic Park outside of the context of that movie and feeling the same level of excitement and nostalgia and emotion that I did watching the movie just listening to the score. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of there being a job where you have to translate emotion into music felt like it was exactly the reason why I was connected to the piano. And so I told my parents when I was 12 that I want to try to find a way to get into film scoring.
I love that. First of all, in this audience, are there any piano performance composition majors? Like, give me like some whoops over here, a few. Oh, okay, good. I was like, hopefully. I'm curious. You didn't mention it, but you are from an LA family, like a real LA family, and like worked in the industry. And I do think it's interesting because they still wanted you to be an artist if it wasn't their type of artistry. Have you asked them later, like why it was piano and like where that came from?
Yeah, so the piano was because my dad was driving one day while my mom was pregnant, and there was some piano music that came on the radio, and it made him cry, and he's not a crier at all. I think I've seen my dad cry like twice in my entire life.
Wow.
And so that really moved him. But talking to them about it later, it also really was the fact that they felt like that skill set might get me into places that they couldn't get me access to by themselves. Like I remember when I started thinking about college, when I was a junior, I got a scholarship to go to Berklee College of Music, and most of my friends were going there. So I told my parents that's where I'm going to college, and they were like, no. We actually want you to be a musician to get a scholarship to go to a real school and study something real. We'd much prefer you to go to USC and be a lawyer or something like that. And so I realized that music was really the fact that they thought that it could kind of get me into spaces that they couldn't afford to get me into. And it was really only the fact that I got into Juilliard that they were like, okay, you can go to a conservatory. But had it not been Juilliard, that would have been a pretty big fight.
They would have been, no, not about it. I mean, this is a conservatory too. This is an art school. So they would have been like, you could go to SCAD, but nothing else. I appreciate that. Well, I think, again, you are now an Oscar-winning composer and Oscar-winning artist. For folks that don't know, he won Best Live-Action Documentary for The Last Repair Shop, the short from a few years ago. Very clap-worthy. But what you've done with Wild Robot, I think is just so exceptional. First of all, how many of you have seen it? Yes, good times. Awesome. So you know about the migration scene. We won't spoil too much, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about it because I don't think people realize the film is very moving, but your score is such a huge part of what happens because so many of the most impactful moments don't have words. There is literally your score leading it. So I'd love for you to talk about having that sort of freedom to do that with Kris on this one.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much. It's definitely something that I appreciated so much in Kris Sanders, the director, just because he talked about in our first meeting, the idea that he wanted to build what he called houses for music where there would be moments of not having any dialogue and music being the thing that was really carrying most of the emotional weight in terms of telling the story. And even throughout the process, there were times where I would write a cue, and once he heard the cue, he actually would start to carve out more space and get rid of more dialogue because he felt like some of the dialogue was not superfluous, but just kind of doubling down on what's already being said in the music. And so him talking about that in our first meeting, for me, felt incredibly exciting, slightly daunting, but not in a way that I didn't really want to embrace. I think because when I first started realizing what music could do in film and TV when I was a kid, I fell in love with those, especially animations that relied on music in that way, thinking about Silly Symphonies or Tom and Jerry or Looney Tunes or the old Disney cartoons. Like a lot of those really rely on music and there's no dialogue at all. And because of that, the music has to be at this pretty high level of musicality and musicianship. And, so many of those composers came straight out of the classical world, and the music that they're writing is of a level that the greatest classical musicians would be happy to play it. Yeah. And they also were really gifted at creating these melodies that were so iconic and helped these moments in the movie become, indelibly connected to these themes, and you could sing the theme outside of the context of the movie and you'd feel those same things. So to me, that was the challenge. It was trying to figure out how to write melodies that would be incredibly clear and memorable, how to develop those things over the course of the film. Because I also think about those musicians and those composers at that time, they were great at storytelling in that they'd have themes and they were responsible for figuring out how those themes developed over the course of this whole movie so that by the time a main theme comes back at the end of the movie, you're getting all these feelings that you don't even really register why, because there's been all this motivic development through the entire, hour and a half, 2 hour movie. So all of those things, I think for me, are so much of the reason why I wanted to become a composer in the first place, that it really felt like an exciting challenge for me on this film.
And I love to Kris, who directed this one, who also did How to Train Your Dragon and Lilo and Stitch, and he's just an icon in the animation industry. He's such an also incredible director. And even though you're a director in your own right and clearly know about storytelling within music, I love how one scene that you were sort of composing for you, he really pushed back on your first take on it. And it was a moment of like a bit of uncomfortableness for you, but similarly to how you began composing, you went to some therapy on it and then you figured out where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's the migration sequence.
Yeah.
And, I think that's the other reason why I've always loved film scoring is because of the collaborative aspect. Like, this movie and this score is only what it is because I worked on it with Kris, and without him, it'd be a completely different thing. And so when I first started working on the project, the very first theme I wrote was the main theme for the movie, which the biggest iteration of it is in that migration sequence. And I wanted to tackle that section first because usually what I do when I work on a film is I watch the film or read whatever I have and try to see what thing is viscerally moving me the most, because it kind of goes back to that childhood connection to emotion and music. And I kind of meditate on that emotion and go to the piano and improvise until I find something that feels that way. And so watching the movie, that migration sequence, which for those of you who haven't seen, it's where Roz, the robot, has been teaching this young Gosling how to fly over the course of this part of the film, and has to prepare him for a migration and basically say goodbye and have him go on this migration. And for me, I had a daughter just before working on this film, and she was about like 6-7 months when I started working on this scene. And so naturally I started thinking about the easiest analogy, which is the idea of her going to college. And I wrote this piece of music that felt really emotional to me and felt like it was the perfect way to encapsulate that feeling of sending her off to college. And I shared it with Kris, and he listened. And he was like, "Yeah, this isn't it. This is not right." And then he ironically was like, "Maybe you should imagine sending your daughter off to college." And I was like, "That's actually what I imagined." And maybe it's because she's 6 months old, and that's why I can't imagine it very well. But what I realized is that the more we talked about it, the more I recognized that my imagination of what that moment would be like was very cute and sweet and innocent. And it was us like waving at each other and her like looking back and like, this kind of naive idea of what that possibly could be like. Hopefully it's positive. But Kris really reminded me of the complexity of this moment for Roz and Brightbill, and that there's something that's happened between them that's possibly irreparable. They're not saying the words goodbye. They're not saying the words I love you. They may not ever see each other ever again. And that conversation, I remember going back home and looking at my 6-month-old daughter and thinking about the realities of parenthood and the fact that, like, no matter how hard I try, I'm inevitably going to fail her. I'm inevitably going to do something wrong. She's going to have to forgive me for things or accept things about me. And the idea that something could happen that puts us in this incredibly difficult place at that point where you're saying goodbye and letting her off into the world, it was really an emotional thing for me. And so I just kind of took that emotion and went to go write something based on that feeling and brought that to Kris. And then Kris was like, "That's it. Now," he actually encouraged me at that point to write away from picture and continue to write based on that feeling and build out that theme. And he was like, "We'll actually animate and build the scene around you and around the music." And so it was really freeing to, once we had that emotion, got on the same page there, for me to just follow the music and the feeling.
Love that. Art is therapy, everyone. That is the lesson. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, now we're going to dive into our popcorn buckets. For folks that don't know, this is our way of going through some of the things that you've seen on the screen. All right, so let's take a peek in our first popcorn bucket. These ones are based off of quotes. Okay. Hopefully it's something that you've seen on the screen and you can remember it. You ready?
Yeah.
Suppose a task cannot be completed.
From Wild Robot.
Yes.
Just thinking about the fact that Roz the entire time is approaching this like a task. Her job as a robot is to take on these tasks that she has to complete. That's what she does and what she's programmed to do. And this idea that being a parent, you're never complete with that task, no matter what. Yeah.
I'm curious, and it could be about Wild Robot. Like you said with Kris, he had you like imagine your daughter going off to college. Sometimes directors have to communicate that way. Can you think of something that you've been given a note by a director, because you've worked with some incredible ones, Ava DuVernay, Fairly Guys. It's been a lot. So, what was a note on a movie where they were like, "I need this feeling," that was very intangible, but you had to kind of find it?
I always go back to one of my first projects that I worked on. It's actually the very first film that I scored. It was a documentary about this woman, Elaine Stritch, and it was like a Broadway legend. And she was still alive at the time of the film, but she was dealing with a lot of health issues. And she had diabetes, but she was also like a raging alcoholic and very unapologetically so. And there was a scene where she was in the hospital and her doctor was basically telling her she had to change her lifestyle or else she could pass. And I wrote this cue and the director was like, this feels a little too sad. It feels like the doctor is literally saying she's going to die. Let's dial it back. And so then I wrote a different cue and shared that with the director. And she was like, this doesn't feel sad enough. This is a very serious moment, and now this doesn't feel like it's heavy enough. And so trying to find this balance between it being a sad moment, a very scary moment, but not going too far. And what was so fascinating is that after a number of attempts, the thing that actually solved the issue was I just took the very first piece that I wrote and changed the instrument from piano to like a keyboard. It was just a different instrument. And that's what solved it. And what I realized was that it was the sound of the piano that was making her feel like it was too sentimental and too emotional in that first version. And that is something that really I held on to throughout my entire career so far, and that it made me realize that the sound of each of these instruments is so subjective to each person, subjective to each director. When a director tells me they want this to be nostalgic, that's going to be very different from Ava DuVernay to Lee Daniels. And so trying to figure out how to have those conversations to bridge that gap of the subjectivity is so important, so that when I get something that's really vague like nostalgia or purple or whatever else, I kind of have a way to figure out what that is for that director.
Yeah, very difficult. Moving on. You don't escape trauma by ignoring it. You escape trauma by confronting it.
Origin.
Yeah, Ava DuVernay. That is another one. It is not a documentary, but it has documentary elements to it. I'm sure that was probably a difficult pairing because there's an emotional hero story that's playing out in one half of the movie. And then there's these just real life reenactment moments of the origins of racism and systematic oppression and the caste system. How did you sort of divide that in one film?
Yeah, with that, I think I really have to also give so much credit to Ava and our collaboration and her really guiding me with what each moment needed to feel like. Because some of the more emotional moments, like this is based on Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, and it's about her writing this book, and she dealt with a lot of personal trauma while she was writing this book. And so those moments of her own personal trauma, I think, were very clear emotionally. But then there were times that I wasn't sure how to handle the material. Like I think there's this sequence in the film that we called the trio, I think, and it goes between these men that are sewer cleaners in India in the lower caste that have to go into the sewers to unclog them, and they only have oil on their skins, and they're like pretty much naked going into this sewage water, and it cuts between that and a slave ship and the Holocaust, and it's like all this imagery that's incredibly difficult to watch, incredibly painful to watch, and it was actually Ava that encouraged me to write something that was very, very, very simple and very, very sparse. It's just piano and cello for 6 minutes or something like that. And her reasoning for that was because she wanted it to feel very obvious that all of these things are connected. And she didn't want us to get too into trying to score this moment and score that moment and have us feel like we're being taken all over the place. She wanted to have something that felt like it treated the whole thing as one piece. And then I think the simplicity of it also really hammered home the idea of the simplicity of this caste system and how clear it is when you look at it that way. And the result was actually far more emotional watching these very difficult and tragic images against this very simple piano piece of music, because the juxtaposition of that felt like just really powerful. And so a lot of it was just kind of following the film's guidance, but especially Ava telling me what she felt like the music needed to do in each of these sections.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen Origin, it's very powerful. You should definitely check it out. We're going to move into our next popcorn bucket. These are true or false.
Okay.
So you're 50-50 on these. The Oscar won by the 2023 short documentary, The Last Repair Shop, is now displayed at the actual LAUSD musical instrument repair shop in Los Angeles that is featured in the film. True or false?
True. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
How did they make that happen?
So, they give us 2 statuettes, one for Ben, one for me. And so Ben and I agreed that there will always be one at the shop, and we, swapped them out, and they built a little plexiglass case that they put in. And then Steve, the shop manager, actually found at one of the other LAUSD shops a huge safe that he literally every day takes it down from the case, puts it in the safe, and then every morning puts it back.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And also that it'll live there. But also that means we've got to get you an Oscar for Wild Robot, so that way you can just leave it there and you'll still have the one at your house. Like, this man is putting it on display. So let's get him an extra one.
Yeah.
Just, for the deco, for the Instagram. Here we go. The color palette in The Wild Robot evolves to convey emotional shifts and the narrative beats. True or false?
Oh, I'd say true.
I know. There's some folks here from DreamWorks. They would literally come across this stage if I didn't get that right. There you go. I see y'all. Folks from Universal and DreamWorks here. No, the visual language and the musical language of Wild Robot really do pair together. Did Kris talk to you a little bit about that? About like when he knew the colors were going to dive in, that he wanted maybe the music to match that? I know you did a lot of stuff the other way around, but were there other tweaks like that?
I think it was very natural in terms of the process, because for me, when I first saw all the concept art, like I'm a pretty, I think everybody has synesthesia, but I definitely need to see what something's going to look like because it will sound differently to me in terms of like, if this film looked differently, I would have written a completely different score. But as animation was coming in, because when I started on the project, it was, I was on the project for almost 2 years. And so when I started, it was just black and white pencil sketches. And then as they brought in the previs, Kris would start to explain to me what else was going to be happening. So it was like, they still had to do some final animation or some lighting things. And he would describe, color things that would be changing or light things that would be changing. And so that was very helpful for me to understand that, there's this whole visual thing that's going to happen here that I'm not really seeing. Or I think about the butterflies moment, for example, where there's literally like 80-something thousand butterflies that are flying. But when I first saw it, it was pretty sparse. And it was helpful for him to explain to me what that was actually going to look like and how all-consuming and engulfing that moment was going to be. And then I think about another moment that really struck me color-wise was the whole ending of the movie where the forest is, spoiler alert, on fire. And but it's like this magenta fire.
They're
like
okay.
this,
don't worry about it.
Yes.
It's cool.
But it's, something I've never seen before. And so like that also was super inspiring. Once I saw that, it definitely shifted the way that I approached that as well. So it was very helpful having Kris continue to explain to me how things were going to develop. And then as soon as they got new imagery in, they would update it for me as soon as possible so that I could be reacting to that.
Yeah. And again, if you haven't seen Wild Robot, I think it's available now on Peacock, also like VOD, and they have like an hour of bonus footage, even if you buy that. And if you're still hungry for more, the folks at DreamWorks Universal did a companion book that is absolutely incredible. And I just cannot tell folks, if you really like this movie, there's just so much extra content that you can find out about it. And it's become an instant classic already. Before we do into our last bit, I'm curious for you because I love talking to composers. I have musical crushes on all of you, and you all are so incredibly talented with what you can do. Who is your musical crushes? Like, not just inspirations, but the ones you're like, I just like what they're doing, and you're like, stop down for it.
I mean, I always think of John Williams immediately, even though that's more like inspiration. But, I just think, especially working on a movie like this, I always am literally studying him and like studying how he's handling, the goodbye scene in E.T. with E.T. and Elliot, and how he handled the last 30 minutes of Star Wars. Like, I'm studying it in a way that makes me feel very bad about myself first, but then also very excited. But then in terms of like people that I'm even like friendly with and also like contemporaries, like Nick Britell.
Yeah. Nicholas Britell, for folks who don't know, Succession composer.
Yeah,
also
Bill Street Can Talk, Moonlight. Like, it's funny. My wife, I feel like, literally every time we get in the car, it's Bill Street Can Talk. It's playing on the car, and I love it. Ludwig Göransson, another like good friend, and also I'm so inspired by the way he approaches like production and synths with orchestration. Hildur Gudnadottir, what she did for Joker, Johnny Greenwood, and also John Batiste, who I've known since college. He was a couple years ahead of me at
Yes,
Juilliard.
to say he's Juilliard grad too. Yeah,
and he's like a big reason why I went there, and I talked to him like a lot through school. But the night before I had my audition, I went and talked to him, and to see what he's doing in film is super fun. So yeah, those are a handful.
Yeah. So you're gonna start acting like he did in Saturday Night?
No.
Posted it. John Baptiste plays the band inside. Billy. Is it
Billy Preston?
Is Billy Preston? Thank you
yeah.
very much. Yeah, he plays Billy Preston and his band in Saturday Night, which I was like, he's getting on the camera. Watch, watch. It's gonna happen. Yeah. All right, now we're gonna do our rapid fire. Gonna dive into the world of Universal.
Oh my gosh.
Your favorite movie snack?
Oh, favorite movie snack. Oh man, when I was a kid, it was either Raisinets or like chocolate covered cookie dough.
Yeah, okay.
Like those are, and then I would put some of that in the popcorn. That was yeah.
Yeah, I dig the popcorn mixer, people. Last show that you binged?
Oh, we actually are rewatching The Leftovers right now. We're like almost done with it. So that's kind of the most recent one that comes to mind. And actually before that it was Fargo, the latest season of Fargo.
Oh, nice.
That, yeah.
And our podcast is primarily features about film. We do talk a little bit about television, but I always want credit every time I talk to Kris that not every single question I ask him is about Bridgerton. Because I have seen your work so much. I watch it on repeat. So that any given week, the last show I binged could have been Bridgerton, especially the Queen Charlotte season. Favorite film score of all time?
Probably E.T.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Williams. Have you spent time with John?
I've only met him once. It was a very surreal experience. Kobe Bryant introduced me to him.
Wow,
it was a very surreal moment. But it was a very brief conversation, and that was it. Yeah.
Was that like the Oscar? Because that was your year for the first Oscar, right?
It was
the Dear Basketball year, or maybe not.
No, it was actually. When they were doing Dear Basketball, but it was a performance at the Hollywood Bowl.
Oh, wow.
And it was like a John Williams night, and they did a little bit from that, and we went backstage afterward. And, yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah, that is a good one. Kobe Bryant introduced you to John Williams.
Yeah,
that's epic.
Well.
Going to the movie theater alone, yes or no?
I like it as a concept, but I just never have been able to do it.
Oh, really?
It's like, I feel like maybe I'm... I need companionship more than I'd like to admit, maybe, or something.
Oh, yeah, you are a composer. Movie people were like, leave us alone. Putting me in a dark room with nobody. Your favorite classic Universal film?
Oh, I mean, the first one that popped in my head is Jurassic Park. I feel like that's like just, growing up in the 90s and not only seeing that movie, but I remember when the ride came to Universal Studios and like getting on the ride and the gates opening and the music starting. It just was like very exciting moment. But I feel like that movie was like one of the most magical realizations of like how a movie can transport you to like another reality in a way that I love.
I'm going to ask this one too, because again, I think you're an inspiration to these young people that are trying to burgeon out in the movie and music and wherever industry, because you can be his age and have 2 Oscar nominations and 1 Oscar and be, doing feature-length film adaptations, things like that. But what haven't you done yet that you're anxious to do? Because you've already directed, you've already been composing. It's already a lot. So,
I think I definitely haven't directed a feature film like that. That'd be exciting. But outside of the context of film, I'm wanting to do a lot of multidisciplinary, multi-sensory kind of experiences. I've been working on this thing with a chef for the last 5 years, actually. I mean, it's just kind of been on and off, but he's this amazing Michelin star chef. We've been trying to figure out how to have this dinner experience that is a narrative that's also told through the music that you're experiencing while you're eating and through the visual environment. But I really feel like this idea of collaborative storytelling is something that I want to explore even off screen in different iterations.
Oh, I dig that. Yeah, I want to go to that. It's like food with the music. So like when I bite into it, I'm going to hear like
exactly.
symphony.
Like very choreographed, like musicians at the table, like very.
Wow. Yeah, I want to go to that. Make it happen. Actually, I should be talking back there to the folks at Universal or something. Y'all make it happen. Kris, it was incredible to chat with you today. Thank you so much for sharing all the things that you've seen on the screen. Thank you all for watching and being our first live audience.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And go check out Wild Robot if you haven't.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank y'all.